I was mentioning last week how someone was asking me, how do we get the church to grow again after this transition? And so I reminded people, grab the business cards out here. 80% of the people who come to a congregation usually come because someone has suggested it. So make sure you got one of these. I also want to talk, though, about another area of the congregation that's important, especially if we do want new people to be coming in, and that's our youth program. We have a youth program where our kids learn a spiritual lesson every Sunday. And now that it's past Labor Day, we need to rebuild the volunteer base there. So Anna Stracy, our Youth and Family Ministry Director, I'd like to build it so we got enough people that you just need to do it once a month. And I got a sign-up sheet out there in the credenza, but especially right now we need somebody for our Unitots room, which is basically the 3 to 5-year-olds. And Anna pointed out to me, even if you want to serve in the nursery, you don't have to change any diapers. Diaper changes are done by texting the parents to come in and do the diapers. So that might give you a chance. But yeah, so we're just looking for people who'd be willing to once a month be back there, help, just love our children. And so if you'll sign up for that, I'd really appreciate it. And then Anna can contact you and we can work out the rest. So I should say good morning. So, how many of you have ever looked in a mirror? Of course, we all have. We all looked in a mirror, right? And of course, you hear the people lament about what they see in the mirror and all that. But I want you to think about the premise that perhaps when you're having a challenge in your life or someone is really ticking you off, is it possible that they are being a mirror to you? What is it that's missing within me right now? Why are my buttons getting pushed by this person or being pushed by this situation? As a lot of you know, we're doing a theme of fearless living for September and October, and we are covering the book Eye of the Storm by Gary Simmons. Now, if you've missed the first couple weeks, no problem. Each lesson is kind of self-encapsulated, but if you do want to see the recordings, the video, of course, is posted on unitytampa.org, or you can ask for a CD over there in the bookstore. But it's all about finding our centeredness, our wholeness, when everything around us seems to be crazy. And the purpose is to be centered, not to get rid of the storm, but recognize that we can be centered and calm in a situation if we truly recognize that there's nothing that can separate us from God. You don't need to be more spiritual. We're already spiritual beings having a human experience. So if that's the case, why do we feel threatened by the things that are around us? So the first week, we got a lot of hits on this particular title online, and that was "Nothing and Nobody is Against Me." And the affirmation was, "The universe fully supports me in being all I'm created to be." And then last week it was "Embrace the tiger." Recognize that when a conflict comes, rather than trying to reject it, be willing to embrace it and see what the message is. So I know we've been taught otherwise by our society, that this is not the way we should usually approach these things, but it is the spiritual approach. In unity, we're of course loving people, and of course if we're all parts, all cells in the body of Christ, then we can behold the Christ presence in each other. And that can be very challenging when the hair on the back of my neck is standing up about the situation. But if we start to believe that someone or something is against me, Jesus has two names for that. It's enemy or adversary. We have an enemy or an adversary. And the first sign that indeed we may be dealing with a situation with a hidden message is when we feel like we need to exert control over the situation. As a minister, I've learned that I have no control over most situations. The more I try to control, the more I recognize that no, I just need to go with the flow on this. Also, another sign that you maybe have a challenge going there is if I'm feeling that I need to be right and you need to be wrong, and I need to prove my point and argue my point, rather than just exploring each other's views on a particular situation. When another is holding my well-being hostage, then perhaps, I've got something to look at. So, in what area of your life do you have an adversary? Is it in your health? Do you have a health challenge in your life that, I've heard people say, I'm going to fight this cancer. It's like, well, maybe you need to embrace the cancer. Maybe you need to figure out what the message is there. Usually it's just pent-up rage or anger that hasn't been expressed. What about relationships? Yeah, that's an area where we often think that we have an adversary, but in reality, like I said, let's explore this a little bit more. What's going on? Then, of course, there's our occupation. Do we enjoy what we do for a living? Or is perhaps the challenge right now that we're looking for work or trying to find a new job? What about spiritual growth? I remember seeing an interview with an actress who had gotten breast cancer, like in her 30s. She prayed to God to heal her breast cancer, and it didn't happen, but she did have surgery and was cured. But she got very angry that God didn't heal her breast cancer, because that's the way she knows God works. And now she's an evangelical atheist, just teaching people that there is no God. After all, God didn't intervene in her life. And then, of course, finances. Is your financial situation, are we in the flow so that all of our needs are met, our obligations fulfilled, and our desires demonstrated? These are all areas of our life that we can have an adversary. So what does Jesus have to say about this? Because 2,000 years ago, people were facing the same kinds of challenges. In the Gospel of Matthew, 5th chapter, 38th verse, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist injustice. And if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him also the other. And if anyone would sue you to take your coat, let him have your shirt as well. And if a soldier forces you to carry his gear 1 mile, go with him for 2 miles. Give to him who begs from you, and do not refuse him who would borrow from you. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless anyone who curses you, do good to anyone who hates you, and pray for those who persecute you." And I know this is a very challenging Bible verse for a lot of people, but this last verse, Matthew 5:44, could it be that these are instructions on how to truly handle the adversary in our lives? Love your enemies, bless anyone who curses you, do good to anyone who hates you, and pray for those who persecute you. Let's take a look at those 4 concepts. Number 1, love your enemies. Love. How do we express love? Of course, we express love in different ways. Sometimes it's a romantic love. Sometimes it's a family love. Sometimes it's an unconditional love. I know Ed Rabel, the late professor at Unity Seminary, would say, love, unconditional love, is to wanting to see the best unfold, not only for yourself, but for everybody else. And I thought that's a pretty good definition. But when we have something come into our life that we consider an enemy, it allows us to discover the resources that we're lacking. Like I said last week, when we get to the point where we recognize, I haven't got a clue on what to do here, that we open ourselves up to the intuitive message that we get, or maybe the thought that comes that hadn't been there before. Suddenly, we've discovered something new within ourselves, the right thing to do, or the right thing to say at the right time. It's showing us a place where suddenly we feel disconnected from God, which is impossible. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. We're always connected with God. The challenge in this physical world is that we often forget it or fall asleep to it. So, if I am truly connected with God, why am I feeling intimidated in this situation? That's the question to ask ourselves. So, if we look at this thing as holding up a mirror, the person or the situation holding up a mirror in our lives and allowing us to see, oh, what's missing here? What is it that I don't like about myself? Or what part have I just been unconscious about? That's where the value comes in the relationship, and that's why we need to value these situations that come into our life. Let me tell you about a woman named Mary. She had a nice job, and she got promoted to be a supervisor, but suddenly she was getting a lot of conflict with 2 employees. And as she really started to dig deeper in a counseling session, she recognized that she has this desperate need to be liked by everybody. And as she explored the relationship she had with these 2 employees, she recognized that both of them were envious of her being promoted instead of them, and so they were expressing it as not liking Mary. I mean, they were mirrors to each other, and they were the perfect way of bringing forth, for Mary, it's like, well, why do you feel like you need to be liked by everyone? Why aren't you willing to assert, what needs to be done here? And for them, it's like, well, why are you envious that she got the promotion rather than you? We need to be able to see that mirror that's being held up to us. Number 2, bless anyone who curses you. To bless is to confer prosperous energy upon a situation, an object, a person, a situation. We need to let go of seeing this person, once again, as the enemy. So can we see the highest good unfolding in the situation? You see, by blessing in a situation like this, we are reclaiming our power and dignity. Because so much of this, and you'll hear this a lot in the New Thought movement, you're surrendering your power, you're giving away your power. You're allowing somebody else, you're allowing the tail to wag the dog, so to speak, because we just can't let go of this particular injustice. In the Bible book of Genesis, chapter 50, there's the story of Joseph, and it was turned into the musical, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But if you remember, Jacob had 12 sons, and as the sons were growing up, they did not get along very well, and Joseph was the one who really seemed to tick everybody off, so they sold him into slavery and told Dad that he had been killed. And Joseph goes through this wonderful, meandering, symbolic story where he suddenly becomes the assistant to the king of Egypt. And he's able to save the whole region by recognizing that there's going to be this huge drought, so they need to store enough food for the drought. And as the story wraps up, the other 11 brothers come to Egypt to find some food, and who do they discover? Joseph. And so Joseph says to them, because they're like, oh my God, he's going to kill us or whatever. And Joseph says, hey, look, you guys meant this for evil, but God meant it for good. If you hadn't done what you have done, I wouldn't be here, and all of these people, would have died. So by blessing it, we're saying, okay, I trust in divine order. I trust that the proper sequence of events are happening, even if they seem illogical, even if they seem unjust. We know that everything is unfolding the way it needs to be. I had somebody asking me about politics earlier. Everything is unfolding exactly how it needs to be. Now, Joseph Campbell, in his Power of Myth interviews, when he was asked about the world being great, just the way it is, and he was saying, well, doesn't that mean you don't care about anything? He goes, oh, no, I care about something. The older Irish saying, is this a private fight or can I get involved? If you believe in the battle, are you willing to be a soldier in the battle? It's part of our thing to use our gifts, passions, and talents to express in this world what it is we want to see unfold in this world. So, bless it and know that it's no longer against us. Number 3, do good to anyone who hates you. That will really piss them off. But here again, let go of the feeling that I need to be right, you need to be wrong. So, asking yourself, what's the right thing to do here? What's the right thing to do? And the purpose, for ourselves, our inner agenda, is to find that center, find that wholeness again, to discover resources and ideas that weren't there until I could say, I don't know what to do. God, guide me in this. Show me the good in this. In the Gospel of Matthew, 16th chapter, 26th verse, Jesus says, for what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? And I believe one of the symbolisms of that is, if I'm right and all of you are wrong, well, what have you gained? What have I gained? We're open to the divine love just flowing into the relationship, and then we can finally say, my way is right for me, and your way is right for you. We can agree perhaps to disagree, or we can find a common ground to move forward with. And number 4, pray for those who persecute you. There's often an error that you need to pray to be relieved of the person who's persecuting you, or to change your geographical location, whatever. But here again, what's the gap in the awareness? What do I need to learn about myself in this situation? In the Gospel of Luke, 23rd chapter, 34th verse, Jesus is hanging on the cross, being tortured to death. And he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So could it be that Jesus was, one, freeing himself of judgment and condemnation of others? And he was also freeing them from believing that they were harming him. Everything is unfolding exactly the way it needs to unfold. And of course, there's powerful symbolism in the whole crucifixion, which I don't have time for today. But we lift ourselves and the situation into peace, into serenity. We're not diminished by the situation. Now, in the book Eye of the Storm, in the last chapter, Gary Simmons describes how one day he was closing a garage door, but rather than grabbing the handle and manually closing it, he grabbed the slat and pulled down, and the door pinched on his fingers, causing excruciating pain. And he said, and it was just suddenly this altered state of consciousness where his whole life flashed before him. And he said he talked to other people who had a near-death experience or a life-threatening situation come, and all of them experienced the same thing, this sudden review of our lives. And he says, but the weird thing is the thing that really sticks out the most is, where did I cause pain to other people? Where was I out of integrity and not being authentic with other people? Those are the things that really stuck with him. And of course, he was able to get his fingers out of the door, had them bandaged for a while, but he realized, wow, I need to reconcile here with some of these people that I did wrong. He said, if I were to die today, what do I wish I had taken care of? So he made his list and started contacting people. And he said it was interesting, not one of them had any ill will against me. And then he said, but he recognized that he felt incomplete until he had the chance to apologize, or at least explain, what he was thinking or what he was feeling at that moment. And so he did this for 21 days, where he, at the end of the day, what do I need to make right here? And he says, in that way, it allowed me to do it in a much more timely manner. And then he says, by the time the 21 days were over, I recognized I was walking through my life and walking through my day in such a healthy way that I didn't have to mop up after myself anymore. So I'm going to encourage you to try, or I shouldn't say try, as Yoda would say, don't try, do. You got the handout when you came in. If you didn't get the handout, you can get it, on your way out. And then, of course, the study guide that we've got is out there too. And this will allow you to just ask yourself these questions. A, describe the situation revealed to you by your heart. What did or didn't you say or do that might have caused some hurt or separation? B, ask your heart how you could have responded differently to those involved. What difference would you have made had you related from your heart? C, what inner resources was missing that helped create the situation? What were you being instead? For example, insecure, unworthy, not good enough, etc. And then D, what will you do tomorrow to reconcile with this person or people in this situation? Complete the sentence, if given the gift of tomorrow, I promise my heart that I will, and then complete the sentence. So I encourage you to work with this process. It's been transformational for a lot of people. And I know for me, as I alluded to earlier, my thing was unworthiness. I grew up as a pipsqueak, and I was bullied a lot as a kid. And one of the realizations I had was, I had this growth spurt in high school where I grew like 8 inches in 1 year. But it wasn't until I was like in my 20s that I started realizing, here I am like 5'10", and if I'm standing next to someone who's 5'10", I'm thinking that I'm many inches shorter than them, because that's the way it was for so much of my life. And as I was able to evolve out of my introvertedness, being willing to open my heart to other people and be totally present, give people full attention, suddenly I could shed that unworthiness. It took me like 50 years to do it, but I got to the point where I could sublimate it. It's not going to go away completely, but it doesn't push my buttons anymore. So I encourage you to be willing to work with this process. We have an affirmation every week, which is printed in your bulletin, an affirmative prayer. I'll have Duncan put it up there, but like I said, you can check it in your bulletin. I release judgments about myself and others. I relax into oneness, rejoicing in the freedom of forgiveness and understanding. Let's say that together. I release judgments about myself and others. I relax into oneness, rejoicing in the freedom of forgiveness and understanding. And then, of course, this week's takeaways are what we were working on: loving, blessing, doing good, and praying. Our closing story today is about a woman facing a very formidable adversary. And the story is from Steve Hartman of the CBS Evening News.